Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. In this week's video I wanted to share a tutorial of this pie slice painting. The materials I used were a number 30 spotter, a number 14, a number 8, and a number 6 round brush, and I also used a number 1 round brush. Which is rough 140 pound paper, m.graham watercolors, and I used a Prismacolor Kohl Erase pencil, a Papermate Tough Stuff eraser stick, and for highlights I used a Uniball Signo broad white gel pen. If you are curious about any of the materials that I used, those were all linked in the description box down below. So to start off, I did a really light mixture of Hansa yellow to do the crust. This didn't need to be too light, almost white, just because this is a baked crust and it had a really nice golden quality to it. I did the lattice top and then I made sure to go around bottom and side where you would have the base of the crust as well. Once that dried, I went in with a mixture of dioxazine violet and a hint of maroon perylene just to warm it up. I really wanted it to be a warmer purple, and I knew that this would be the lightest points of some of my berries in this crust. There were a couple of really small white details that I knew I was going to want to add to it, but they were so small and so intricate, and since I don't have masking fluid, I thought the best way to approach this would be to go back in after with my gel pen. So now I start going in with a smaller round brush, and I am using a bit of Indian yellow, and as you can see I'm just kind of patting in some color, washing off my brush, spreading it out, and then dabbing some of it off. I wanted this to have a really random kind of splotchy texture to it, and then after I do the exact same thing but I use transparent orange iron oxide, and then I start going in and darkening that layer. I knew the top part of the pie was going to be really dark, so I didn't need to preserve anything there. And then in the lower part of the crust, I'm going in and I'm just having a really fun watercolor-esque look to it. I'm going in with a lot of dioxazine violet, and then I'm also going in with a little bit of the mix that I used before, just in a stronger dilution. And again, I'm really doing a lot of wet and wet here, since I knew that this had a lot of kind of texture and variance in it. I didn't want to have to do all of that myself, so I really let the watercolor do some of the work there. And then once it was dry, I went in with a pencil and I just kind of touched up some of those segmented lines that I drew in my base sketch, just to let me know where the darks and shadows would be in this painting. And then I go in with a smaller brush and I really start outlining some of those segments. Since I'm looking at my reference photo, I know roughly where all of those segments are and what point I should be focusing on for darks and shadows. And I just kind of follow that, adding the dark areas where I should and blending it out, making sure to not blend it so far as to go into where those segments should be lighter. And for this I'm using the same mixture of my maroon perylene and my dioxazine violet. And then while that is drying, I go in and I start adding more detail to the top of the crust. And I am using a lot of nickel quinacridone gold. I think it's such a beautiful color if you're doing a lot of pastries or baked goods or breads. It's just a really nice color for food in general. I think it's a really nice natural color. And I do a lot of the same patting in color and spreading it out. There are a couple areas where you can see that the crust is perhaps a little bit flakier, so I'm doing some lines in those areas, trying to really mimic what the texture of the crust looks like in my reference photo. And then while that is drying, I go back in and I'm using a darker mixture of my purple. This is leaning more towards only dioxazine violet, and I'm doing the same thing over again, focusing on where the darkest values are going to be and blending them into the lightest values. And I am using a smaller brush for this. Since I did add a lot of darker values, I really wanted to make sure that those were preserved, and then going in and adding some of those smaller fine details, some of those little hints of where, you know, maybe the light is hitting it, and really make those the prominent part of what I was trying to bring out in the filling of this pie. And then since since there was a little bit of pie filling on the pie crust from where it was cut, I wanted to add a little bit of that, and I think that really made it more realistic and lively at the end. And it was just a really nice way to show that it was cut. It is a real image, and it's a really nice way of just taking it to the next level. Then I go back to the crust and I'm adding more of my nickel quinacridone gold, and it's a lot of just adding in those small details. I'm just darkening some of the areas that I already have. Like I said, this is kind of a flakier crust, so I'm adding a lot of fine lines and details, little dots and divots in the crust, areas where it would be darker or lighter and show more value in it. And then once I was getting pretty happy with some of the more toasted qualities of the crust, I wanted to start going in and adding shadow. So what I did was I took my Hansa yellow and I had a little bit of nickel quinacridone gold in there just to warm it up, and just the smallest hint of my dioxazine violet just to kind of push it in a slightly warmer direction. And that is where I started putting in my darker values, my more shaded areas of the crust where they started to overlap. And again, I'm doing this in very much kind of a linear motion. And then I start going back and forth between adding in this shadow detail. I start adding some more yellow touches to the crust since I felt like at times in some areas it was a little washed out, so I wanted to enhance that yellow or golden quality to it and really emphasize where those darker pieces would be in the crust. Since I felt like this was the area that really would push the painting into a more realistic or believable realm, it was something that I wanted to spend more time on in this painting. And I really feel like getting the shadows right in the crust was a really important part of that. So then I go in just one more time and start fixing or emphasizing and adding more detail to the filling of the pie, darkening some of the areas that were on the pie crust that were both in the upper and lower parts of the pie crust, and then just darkening a couple of values. This did take place the second day, and I was just kind of going in and adding a couple more details everywhere. For this, I believe I was using more of the nickel quinacridone gold and also the iron oxide. And you can see I'm just adding a couple more really light layers to the jam part that is on the crust pieces. Since I wanted those to have a little bit of a warmer color to them, I used a little bit of permanent alizarin crimson to really make it warmer, brighter, a little bit pinkier, look a little bit more like a light residue had come onto it. And then again, I'm going in and just adding a little bit more yellow to the pie crust to really warm it up. Since I felt like the second day I didn't really push it as far as I had wanted to the day before, I really wanted to make sure that it was warmer. And then I start going in and I really tried to do a lot of these white details with a dip pen, but I realized that the ink I was using was either too thick to use for it, or the inexpensive pen nib that I had was bent or deformed in such a way that it just wasn't laying down the ink the way I needed it to. So I went back in and I did a lot of these extra details with my Sigma gel pen. And that's really all for this painting and for this tutorial. I hope you really liked it and you found it helpful. I would love if you would perhaps leave a comment down below or like this video or even subscribe to my channel. If you are curious about any of the materials that I used, those were all linked in the description box down below, and I would appreciate it if you had any interest in buying some of those supplies, if you might consider purchasing from some of those links, as I am still waiting to get my Amazon affiliate account to be confirmed, and once it is, the proceeds from those purchases would go towards supporting this channel in the future. So that is all for this video, and I will see you all next week. Bye!